Hello again everyone, it's Mrs Jennison here and I'm an Associate Director of Science for Outward Grange Academy's Trust. In today's lesson we are going to be looking at polymers, their formation and naturally occurring polymers. The majority of this content is triple science only. As with all of our videos, it would be very useful if you had a pen and a piece of paper so that you could work through the activities with us. Our challenge today is to be able to name and give features of polymers and describe the conditions required for polymer formation. Our aspire is to be able to compare the methods of polymer production. Now, polymers are long chain molecules. They have very different properties dependent on which monomer the polymer is made from. There are two ways in which polymers can be made. The first method is addition polymerization, and the second method is condensation polymerization. The first method we are going to look at today is addition polymerization, and you may have done this in an earlier topic, but it's worth us going over it again just to remind ourselves. This is what happens when alkenes join together to make polymers. Now, when we make polymers, many small molecules, which are our monomers, join together to form a very large molecule, which is our polymer. Remember that mono means one, whereas poly means many. No other molecules are actually formed in the process during addition polymerization, so we only get our polymer formed at the end. Now I'm going to insert a video here showing you how this process occurs. I'm going to show how we can draw the formation of polyethene from ethene. So first I'm going to draw my ethene molecules. Now, in the formation of polymers, we use lots of the monomer. This will be my monomer, ethene, and to represent lots, I'm going to use the letter N. So that N could be 100, it could be 1,000,000, it could be 1,000,000,000. It just means a lot of these molecules. Now, when these molecules join together, this double bond opens up. So we will have a single bond between the carbons, and then the other bonds will extend out. Everything on the carbon molecules will stay exactly as it was. And they will all join together in a repeating chain. Now, so that we don't have to draw a huge molecule, we essentially show that this section will repeat, and it will repeat N times. For as many ethenes I had, will be how many times that molecule repeats. So we place an N in the bottom corner to represent that. Now that you've seen how this occurs, I'd like you to draw the polymerization of the molecule on the screen, chloroethene. So you should have had something like the diagram seen on screen now. So we've got N amounts of chloroethene, the double bond opens up, everything on the carbon stays the same, and that section repeats N times. Now the diagram on the right could be worth 3 marks in an exam, and it has been in the past. That is for having the single bond in between the carbons with the extending bond out, everything on the carbons the same, the brackets and the N in the corner. So now I've given you the polymer on the screen at the moment. I'd like you to tell me what the monomer would be from that polymer. So you should have a monomer that, like the one seen on the left of this equation. I'm going to keep representing them as the full equations because that just reminds me of that full process. You should have the double bond in between the two carbons, and then the 4 things exactly the same as on the polymer, so 3 H's and a C5H6. That's actually styrene and polystyrene. Now, last one, I've got a monomer on the screen, which is actually propane. I would like you to complete the polymerization reaction for propane. So you should have something like the equation shown on the screen. We've got N amounts of propane, and that is forming the polypropene molecule you can see on the right hand side of the arrow. So we've got a single bond in between the carbons and then bonds extending out past the brackets. Everything on the carbon atoms has stayed the same, and then we've got brackets around that molecule with the N repeating each time. So earlier where we just had an alkene with a double bond. What that means is, unlike the homologous series we looked at earlier, they will have the functional group on either side of their molecule. So on either side of the carbon chain there will be a functional group. When those types of monomers react, they actually lose small molecules alongside that process. So quite often it's water, so then those reactions will be called condensation reactions because they are losing water as a byproduct. So an example here on the screen has hexandioic acid, so that molecule has got 2 carboxyl groups on it. So it's got 2 carboxylic acid groups, 1 at either end. And then we've got ethane diol. So we've got 2 OHs, 1 at either side of the molecule. Now it's those functional groups that react in the same way in which they did an ester earlier, and we get an ester link. But this time it's not just occurring between two molecules. Because there are two functional groups on these molecules, they can continue to make those ester links and form a long chain polymer called a polyester, as it is the ester link forming to make the link between the small molecules. Now, if we had N amounts of hexandioic acid and even diol, we would get 2N water molecules, because each side of that molecule will form a water molecule. Sometimes, to simplify this reaction, we replace the carbon chain in the middle of the diacid and the diol with an R to represent the chain, or even just a rectangular box or a circle, so that we are just saying it's not that part of the molecule that reacts, it's the functional groups at the end. Again, because we've got an acid and an alcohol, we are making an ester link. So that is how some condensation polymers can form. I'm going to insert a video here that goes through this again so that you can just review that. If you wish to watch the original video, the link is on the screen.
In today's video, we're looking at condensation polymers, and in particular at a type called polyesters, which are made using these ester links. To make things easier, we're going to run through an example first to give you an idea of how it works, and then we'll explain exactly what's going on afterwards. Like all polymers, condensation polymers are made up of lots of individual monomers. With polyesters though, a common combination is to use two different monomers. A dicarboxylic acid monomer, which contains two carboxylic acid groups, and a diol monomer, which contains two alcohol groups. And as a quick aside, if you haven't seen these coloured rectangles within molecules before, they just represent the rest of the molecule. And we tend to use them in general examples like here, where we don't want to make things complicated by showing the specific molecules. In order for the two monomers to combine, the dicarboxylic acid has to give up its OH group, and the diol gives up a hydrogen atom from its OH group. And when these three atoms combine, they form a water molecule. This leaves this carbon from the dicarboxylic acid to bond directly to this oxygen from the diol. And it's this bond that we call the ester link. At the moment, this is technically just a dimer, because it's only two monomers combined. To show it as a repeating unit though, we need to remove this OH and H from the ends, and then point the empty bonds out to the sides, so that they can bond on to other repeating units. And importantly, because we removed an OH and hydrogen again, it will form another water molecule. Then to finish, we add these big brackets to either end that cut through the bonds. If we now put all of this together, we effectively had a dicarboxylic acid monomer plus a diol monomer go to form a condensation polymer, which in this case was a polyester, because this group in the middle is an ester link. And we also formed two molecules of water. In real life, this process often happens with hundreds or thousands of monomers. And so, instead of writing the exact number of molecules we have in front of each molecule, we instead use the letter N to represent how many there are. And we put the N in front of each of our reactants, and in the bottom right corner of our repeat unit. And we need to put a 2N in front of our H2O, because we form 2 water molecules per repeat unit. This is actually why we call these polymers condensation polymers, because the process forms water molecules, like when gaseous water condenses. In order for molecules to be able to combine in condensation polymers, there's a few important things that they need to have. One is that each of the monomers has to have at least 2 functional groups. For example, our dicarboxylic acid has 2 carboxyl groups, and our diol has 2 alkyl groups. Second, there needs to be at least 2 different functional groups overall. So here we have the carboxyl and the alkyl group. And finally, a small molecule is given off in the process, which is generally water. To show you a real example, ethandioric acid can combine with ethandiol to form polyethyl ethanoate and water. The very last thing we need to say is that polyesters are generally biodegradable, which means they can break down naturally, because bacteria and other microorganisms can break down the ester links. Importantly, this is a big difference to addition polymers, like plastics, which generally aren't biodegradable, and so stay in the environment for ages. Anyway, that's everything.
Now that you've seen the video and we've gone through some of this information, I've put some questions on the screen about condensation polymerization. I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to answer those questions. Okay, so some examples of polymers formed by condensation polymerization are polyamides. So that is an example of that would be nylon, and polyesters, which PET is one of those. That's one of the molecules that's used to make a lot of plastic bottles, and also fabrics. So a lot of the materials you wear can be made from these types of polymers. The other product of these reactions is small molecules such as water. Now, polymers formed by condensation polymerization. So your monomers join together, forming the polymer and water molecules. And remember that the monomers in this case have to have 2 functional groups. However, it's actually not just synthetic polymers that can be formed from these condensation reactions. In fact, there is condensation reactions that are occurring in your body right now, and we're going to have a look at some of those polymers. So the first one would be proteins. Now, an example of an amino acid is on the screen at the moment. You can see a box that says R, and that is the part of the molecule that changes to give us our different proteins. But like earlier, we have got two functional groups. There's an amide group, which is the NH2, and then we've got our carboxyl group as well, as we did on our carboxylic acids. And it's those parts that will react to form a polymer chain. Now, proteins are made out of amino acids, such as glycine, but there's many other examples. And amino acids polymerize to make proteins. The order of the different amino acids creates different proteins. So the order of amino acids will be different in enzymes to what it will be in muscles, to what it will be in your hair, or even any other substance in your body. And it's that order that is controlled by your DNA and by ribosomes. Speaking of DNA, so DNA is actually also a polymer. This time it's a little bit different. There's actually 4 different monomers. And you might remember these from biology. We've got adenine, thymine, guanine and cytosine. And the way in which they join is through a condensation reaction that happens on the phosphate group. Now, it's a very large molecule, essential for human life, and it encodes genetic instructions. Those genetic instructions are for the development of functioning of living organisms and for viruses. And quite often they code for the development of proteins also. Most DNA molecules can be described as 2 polymer chains that are made from 4 different monomers. So when you think about the double helix, that is 2 polymer chains, and it's actually the nucleotides that join together to form that helix shape. Other polymers that you may have heard of, starch, which is a polymer made from monomers of glucose, and cellulose, which is a polymer made of monomers of glucose. And it's a slight difference in the way in which they join that causes starch and cellulose to have different properties. Now that we've gone through those, I've actually put a table on the screen that I'd like you to have a go at completing. I've either given you the monomer or the polymer. Okay, so the polymers formed by the glucose monomer are starch and cellulose. You could have had those in either order. If protein is the polymer, the monomer is amino acids. And on the one that has 4 different monomers, the polymer we are forming is deoxyribonucleic acid, commonly known as DNA. So now it's time for us to have a look at some exam questions. So the bottom question is actually quite a long answer question. So I've just boxed the command word there so that you can see it, and we are going to be comparing when we get to question B, which means give similarities and differences. For question A, we want you to draw the bonds to complete the displayed formulae of ethene and polyethene in the equation seen on the screen. For question B, they've given you 2 diagrams and they are talking about polymerization methods. Polyesters are made by a different method of polymerization, and they've given you the equation for the reaction to produce a polyester. They would like you to compare the polymerization reaction used to produce polyethene with the polymerization reaction used to produce a polyester. So you are comparing the first equation with the second equation.